inaugural show here, we wanted to come out with something that has been a fascination to us, something that has captured the attention of our audience on Darkness Radio, something that has continued to grow in popularity and chilling encounters. And of course, I'm talking about black-eyed kids and the black-eyed kid phenomena, which was brought to our attention about 4 or 5 years ago from Jason Offutt and David Weatherly.
Right.
And they were among the first to really start talking about this. And it exploded. We have had listeners from literally around the world share encounters with these creepy critters. So we're here tonight to talk about this and bring you into that world. Joining us for the first half of the show, David Weatherly, and he's a paranormal investigator and author. For 40 years, he's explored the world of strange, interesting cases around the country and abroad. He's written and lectured on a diverse range of topics, including cryptozoology, ufology, and hauntings. And he's a frequent guest on many different radio shows, as well as Darkness Radio, and has appeared on various television programs, including Ancient Aliens, Beyond Belief, and Mysteries at the National Parks. He's a popular speaker worldwide and the author of numerous books, including the one that we brought him in for today, The Black-Eyed Children. David, welcome to the show, and thank you for going beyond the darkness with us.
Hey, guys. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
The Black-Eyed Children. For listeners that are just tuning in for the first time and are not familiar with this phenomena, what can you tell us about this and what these beings might be?
Well, that's a big question. We'll get to that a little bit later, but I can tell you basically what we're dealing with here, when you hear that the black-eyed kids are showing up somewhere, typically an encounter involves someone running into a child, usually between the age of about 9 to the early teens. That's what we hear most often. And these children have solid black eyes, Dave. No whites, no pupil, just an entirely black sclera. And they have very pale skin. They have a very strange way of speaking. Usually it's very monotone. And we find a few other elements that drift in, too, from time to time, such as a foul odor. Sometimes people that encounter these kids think that that the children are attempting mind control on them. So they're really bizarre accounts. And when these kids show up, inevitably, they attempt to gain entry. But they don't try to barge in. They want an invitation. And they tell what I call the victim, just invite us in. This won't take long. It's some of the creepiest things in all my years, Dave, that I've come across when we start delving into this phenomenon. It really is.
Well, right. I mean, first of all, the ideas of the demonic realm or aliens, ghosts, it's all chilling. But then when you kind of incorporate it into children, there's something about it that absolutely makes your blood run cold. And when we began hearing these tales, again, we looked at it as this sounds like an interesting bit of new urban legend that has begun in the vein of the Slender Man and some of these newer characters. But yet this seems to be transcending generational gaps, racial, religious, all types of belief systems have now talked to us about these type of encounters. And we've heard from everyday mom and pop people to law enforcement officials, to researchers, scientists, even members of the military have now reached out to us talking about their encounters. When we've spoken with you, you never cease to amaze me with the tales that you are able to find and the people that have come forward with this. When you're looking at this as a researcher and a collector of tales, is there any signs you're looking for that this isn't just somebody pulling your leg and just giving you an account to just be a part of your next project?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say that, there are a percentage of accounts that I receive that I kind of, I just sit on them quietly because, I'm doubtful about some or all of the aspects of the encounter. Really, over time, being in this field, I'm kind of old school. When I started delving into the supernatural, there wasn't any internet. Google didn't exist. I got all of my education from delving into everything I could possibly read at the time. We're talking about the 70s and the 80s. And then meeting people, like John Keel, the Warrens, Hans Holzer, all those, kind of the founders of our modern wave of studies in this field. And I learned a lot from them. And, John Keel always emphasized to me in conversations with him that you have to really be an investigator / journalist, and you have to pay close attention to these people. He encouraged me to learn, their body language, look for signs. It really, I think, after a time becomes sort of innate. You develop this sense of, when the BS meter starts to go off, and when people are being genuine. Now, I can tell you, Dave, that, and you've probably experienced this too, people who have genuinely had these encounters, it's like talking to a trauma victim, because there's something that has unsettled them so much about running into these kids that they can't quite move beyond it. And people who I think are fabricating, they can't replicate that.
I agree, and we've seen that firsthand when we've spoken to people about these type of cases, and when I've looked into the eyes of military personnel that have had these stories to share, it will run your blood cold. What, if you could tell us, what was the first encounter that you were told about that opened up this phenomena to your study?
The first encounter I heard, Dave, actually was the Brian Bethel account. Now, if anyone's heard anything about the black-eyed kids, they've heard this story. This happened in 1997, and Bethel was a journalist in Texas. He had an encounter with a pair of these kids, posted it online on an early internet forum, and that sort of started what I call the modern wave of these accounts. And that, that was the area I heard about it in the late 90s. And like you, I thought, wow, this is really creepy and interesting, but, this may be another urban legend. However, the accounts kept coming. And, once I started running into people that had genuinely encountered these things, I knew that, wow, there really is something going on. And
can you relate back to us, right, David? Talk to us about that first story, the one that kind of broke it to the internet and to the world, really kind of outing this phenomena. Can you tell us the specifics of it?
Absolutely. Bethel was in Abilene, Texas, living in that area, and he went one evening to write a check to pay a bill. He was going to drop it in a night slot or something. So he drove down to a small strip center area, was sitting in his car writing a check, and these two kids approached his vehicle. Now, Bethel was, for some reason, uneasy right away when these two kids walked up to his car. He was not in a shady area or anything, but something just didn't quite feel right. So he only rolled the window down just a little bit. And these two kids, one of them sort of stepped forward closer to the car, and he started to engage Bethel and said, hey, mister, we want to see a movie. We need our money. We have to go home to get our money. Can you take us? Now, Bethel had the presence of mind to glance over at the movie marquee and realize that the last movie was already well underway. So it wouldn't make any sense anyway to try to, get there and come back. So this just added to his unease. As the children noticed that he was reluctant, they started to press a little bit more. The kid said, come on, mister, we're just a couple of kids, encouraging him to let them in the car. At this point, Bethel took a close look at these kids and realized that they had solid black eyes. Now, that was enough to sort of put him over the edge. He quickly threw the car in reverse. He backed out. As he was pulling away from this lot, Dave, he glanced up in his rearview mirror. No children. They had vanished. Now, the elements of this encounter really are pretty common in a lot of accounts of black-eyed kid encounters. The weird manner of speaking, the odd request, the constant request to come in, whether it's in a home, in a vehicle, whatever it is. They want you to invite them inside. And that harkens back again to, the demonic or, some of the folklore, things like vampires and so forth. They can't enter unless they're invited inside.
That story set the stage for this phenomenon, which is now global and has captured the attention of not only everyday normal citizens, but the movie industry, TV industry, black-eyed children have begun showing up on paranormal TV shows, supernatural shows, and in the movies. Of course, when Hollywood brings them out, they look terrifying and freaky. What people have related back to us is at first, as you said, there's a sense of unease and almost mind-numbing. Like you see them, you realize what's going on, but you don't even really take notice of the jet black eyes to begin with. There's this strange disconnect with what is going on at the beginning, and then it's like your consciousness begins to ebb back into reality, and you begin to realize the weirdness of the situation, the jet black eyes, sometimes the rancid smell, this off-putting feeling that these kids are giving. And it's strange that, as you said, they're usually in groups of as few as one, as many as 4 or 5 I've heard, where one of them is kind of the speaker, the mouthpiece for the group, and will be the one insisting, please let us in, won't you let us in? Or we need to use your phone to call our mom, please let us in. And they're always showing up at awkward times and bizarre points where they shouldn't be there. This is out of place and out of time for what people are encountering. Now, you've collected so many stories through the years that have impacted you, and I know you've got a couple to share with us before you have to head off for the evening. Talk to us, if you would. You've got a story that you've shared before and a brand new story that you've never brought out, but let's start off with the story that you've shared in the past that really kind of unnerved you.
Well, sure, Dave. This is I find it a very strange account, and it's fascinating to me because an animal is involved. Now, you and I both know when we deal with the supernatural realm, when there's an animal present, they're receiving information on a whole different sensory level. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's very compelling to hear that and add that into the account. So what we have in this particular encounter was, again, a gentleman in Texas who ran up to the market. He came back home. He had a couple of bags of groceries with him. Now, the front of his house, he has no trees, there's no shrubs or anything. It's just a very, stark yard. He has a small set of steps, about 3 steps that go up to his front door. He approaches the door. He has his groceries in hand. He reaches up with one hand and opens the door. And as he does this, he's suddenly just startled because there is a young boy standing right beside the steps. Now, this kid was not there seconds ago, but all of a sudden, here he is. He's just appeared. The man turns to him, and this boy looks at him and says, "Is it food time?"
Oh.
Again, this is not normal language.
Right.
This gentleman did not know how to respond. He sort of locked up, and he didn't speak. He was trying to process this. Meanwhile, his front door is standing ajar. He hears his pit bull in the back of the house. Raised this dog from a puppy, trained attack dog. It was 3 years old. He hears it barking, charging through the house. He steals a glance into the hallway. Long hallway that runs to the back of the house, sees the pit bull turn the corner, rushing for the door in attack mode. This dog knew something was wrong. Comes full charge down the hallway. Dave, it gets almost to the door, and it puts the brakes on. Now, this is almost comical because it's sort of a Scooby-Doo moment. This dog is trying to backpedal. But the creepy thing is that this dog went from being a vicious attack dog to suddenly being scared to death. It practically fell over itself, turning around, tail between its legs, head down, whimpering, running back in the house as quickly as it could. This, in turn, terrified the witness. He had never seen this dog behave this way. This dog, he'd seen it kill rattlesnakes with its jaws. This dog, being so terrified, spiked the fear in this man. He jumped in the door, he slammed it and locked it, ran around to the living room to look out the blinds, found that the young boy had disappeared. Now, he describes this boy as pale-skinned, solid black eyes, and very weird language. And the boy continued to talk to him as this whole thing was unfolding, repeating, "I think it's food time. You should invite me inside."
So this kid is not reacting to this large, charging, frothing dog heading his way, which all of our normal reactions would be to maybe take a few steps back or look like we're afraid of what's about to happen.
And you know what this boy did, Dave? He smiled and repeated, "I think it's food time. You should invite me in."
And at that point, the dog turns tail and gets out of there and wants nothing to do with this. Absolutely blood-curdling.
And was permanently changed. This dog hid under the bed for days and has never been the same animal since then.
Has there been another follow-up encounter with this particular person and these black-eyed children?
There has not. Repeat encounters are very rare, curiously enough.
With that said, that again being one of the more ultimately bizarre and chilling stories, and it's food time opens up a myriad of possibilities. Are they talking about eating us, eating our soul? What
Exactly.
is this that they're looking for? But what was really exciting to me is that with all the stories that have been out there, and many people have transcribed our shows and read your books and have shared these stories over and over on the internet, to find new stories and newer stories is getting a little harder. But you have a brand new story, that a new encounter, a real-life encounter that has occurred that you're able to share with us tonight that has not been heard before.
I do, and I personally find this one pretty creepy, Dave. Now, I just got back from Australia. I was invited down there to speak, and as a result, made a lot of connections and ended up with a lot of new encounters of various kinds. And in fact, I'm still receiving them. And I just received a woman promised to send me this account, and she did indeed send it to me just yesterday by serendipity. And I'm still getting some of the details on it, but I couldn't help but bring this one to you because it's so it's so unreal. This lady, she lives outside of Melbourne, Australia. She is an amateur photographer. Now, this account has never been heard. However, it is several years old. It took her several years to even get to the point where she could talk about it again and share this with anyone but her boyfriend. So what happened was she went out one day to do some photography. She really loves to take pictures of landscapes. She drove out of the city about 2 hours. And she got to what she considered a really beautiful location, and she started setting up her equipment. Now, she's an old-school photographer. She got her tripod out. She mounted her camera, and it's one of those that, you look through the lens to set up your shot. And she had all of her gear ready. She bent down, had looked at the landscape and picked out where she wanted, looked down through the viewfinder on the camera, and there was a kid. Now, as you can imagine, this completely startled her. She was in a bare landscape. So, she jerked upright, and sure enough, there's a kid standing there only a few feet away from the camera. She describes him as being pale-skinned, wearing turn-of-the-century clothing, and having solid black eyes. This kid looked at the photographer, and he said, "We don't like image takers." Bear in mind, this kid was by himself, but he's saying we. This woman has such a spike of fear. Dave, she was utterly terrified. She grabbed the camera, didn't even take it off the tripod, threw it in her vehicle, and rushed away from there as quickly as she could. She lived just over 2 hours home. She made it home in an hour and a half. But the story's not over. It gets a little bit creepier. She rushes home. She's physically shaking. She rushes in her house. She locks the doors. She's walking around. She finds herself in a cold sweat. She picks up her cell phone because she's going to call her boyfriend and have him get over there so she can tell him what happened. Now, it was summertime in Australia. She had left the windows partially open, about 6 or 7 inches, so that the house would air out and feel fresh. As she's standing in her living room, she hears a sound down the hallway. She starts making her way slowly down the hallway. At the end of the hall on the right is her bedroom. The door is standing open, and the sound is coming from that room. She stands in the hallway for a few moments, trying to pinpoint exactly what she's hearing. It's a tapping noise, and she realizes that it's something tapping on glass. She feels a hair go up on the back of her neck. She walks slowly to the bedroom door, peers around it very slowly, and as she told me, she almost knew what she was going to see before she did it, but she had to know. She looked into her bedroom. Across from the door, there's the window, about 6 inches open. Staring through that little opening are a pair of black eyes. It was the same kid that she had left in the dust 2 hours ago, at her window, staring through the crack, tapping on the window. Dave, she was so terrified, she rushed down the hallway into the bathroom, barricaded herself in, and called her boyfriend and told him to get there now. She was in hysterics. He got there a few minutes later. He lived fairly close by. Saw nothing. No sign of this child. Nothing. And what was kind of creepy, the bedroom window was now closed. As I said, this has taken this woman several years to be able to share this story with everyone. Dave, when she told me her account, she was physically shaking. She is still having effects from this encounter with this black-eyed kid. And she told me that for months after the encounter, she felt sick. She had frequent bouts of nausea, headaches, a variety of other things. And they didn't go away until almost a year later.
Like she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder.
Essentially, yes.
David, with this said, there's a lot of hypothesis and theory being bandied about on this subject. In your opinion, have you come up with what you think we might be dealing with? What are these creatures?
I have a personal opinion, Dave. You know, this is one of those things in the field that everyone is very divided about. Everyone has an opinion, and there are a handful of things that people sort of fall into. But my personal opinion is that these creatures are something that are interdimensional. I think there's a lot of evidence now to support scientifically the idea of other dimensions of existence. Quantum physicists are talking about it now. And I really think that whatever these things are, they live in a space that is, just a step away from ours, so to speak. And somehow they're coming across into our world. And, I really do. I think that they're coming to feed. I think they're coming to feed on fear, because that's what they inevitably create during their encounters.
David Weatherly, we thank you very much for joining us this evening, sharing some new encounters. If listeners want to follow up and find out more about your work and your books, where can they go?
Best spot is twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com. That is TWOCROWS paranormal.blogspot.com. Links there for everything.
You've got the book Strange Intruders that talk about this and many different types of encounters, and the book Black-Eyed Children. Will they find links to both of those?
They will, and also the new series Wooden Ox that deals with Sasquatch encounters, and a book coming out anytime now on haunted toys.
Really? Great. Well, we'll have to have you back to discuss that as well. Thank you very much for joining us, David Weatherly. Tim, we've been hearing this phenomena now for 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
We're engrossed in it. Our listeners cannot get enough of this topic. I know we were both a little skeptical at the beginning of this when we started to hear these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Have you changed on that aspect, or do you still think this sounds too much?
I was extremely skeptical at the beginning. To say just these short little children with the black eyes and thinking, come on, having these random encounters, and it just seems so out there and so hard to believe, and in some of the stories seem so fantastic that it just seemed too true to be believable. But the sheer amount that we get, and the sheer
terror that these people seem to share when they're telling us these stories,
in the look in the eye, and the impact that these encounters have on people. I don't know. It's really starting to get to me.
There are nights when I head out to my car, I am looking over my shoulder. And I've got kids all around me, 7 of my own and kids all throughout the neighborhood. And I'll tell you, when it's laid out or I'm in a place that there shouldn't be children and I see kids, it puts the hackles up on the back of my neck.
And the fact that you can't put them into one category or another, you can't say definitively, I know what that is probably one of the scariest things about black-eyed kids.
We're going to take a quick break. When we return, the Reverend Mother Christina Rake will join us, along with world-renowned demonologist Keith Johnson, to continue to explore the phenomena of black-eyed kids and what this could be. What are we dealing with? But before we do that, let's go deeper into the darkness. From the Darkhives, here's a theater of the mind. It was the spring of 2012 in Minneapolis. We'd gone through a deluge of rain over about a period of 2 weeks. 2 of our listeners who enjoyed the show after turning in for bed regaled us with this story. It had been raining. They were watching the news one night, and as the news wound down, they turned off the TV, and they were both surprised to hear what sounded like children running and giggling outside. It was between 10:30 and 11 o'clock at night, so this caught both of them off guard. The husband went to the window and looked out through the blinds. Through the haze of rain, he could see no children, but they could still hear the distinct sound of children laughing and giggling. They didn't think much of it. The husband grumbled to his wife, "Why in God's green earth would these kids be out at this time of night?" She calmed him and reminded him that they used to play in the rain when they were children, and it had been raining so much the parents probably just needed a break and sent them out to run and jump in puddles for a while. With that, they retired for the night, switched on the radio, and listened to Darkness Radio. As the show wound down, they turned off the radio and fell gently asleep. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, she woke up. Something was off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something felt wrong. She rolled over in her bed, and there, standing feet away from her bed, were 3 children. 2 boys and a little girl with pigtails in the middle. Now, having been a listener of our radio show for quite a while, she knew about the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, those moments going in and out of sleep when reality and dreams can sometimes mesh, and it's hard to differentiate the two. So being a good student of the supernatural, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and knew that when she opened her eyes, the children would be gone. She drew in her breath, let it out slowly, and opened her eyes. There, still standing silently, like sentinels in the night, were these 3 children. A dull gray light cast across their face from the window, the crack of lightning outside, and she could see their eyes were deep, dark, inset black eyes. Black as coal, black as night. She began to feel panic well inside of her. She slowly reached her arm across to wake up her husband, her mouth open to let out a scream when the little girl in the middle stepped forward. Placing her fingers to her lips, she said, "Shh, we just want to look at you." With that, the woman let out with a scream, reached for her husband, shook him vigorously. He sat up, the lights went on, and the room was empty. There was no one there. She explained to her husband what she just saw, that 3 children were in their room, standing next to the bed. He tried to assure her that it was nothing more than a dream. She told him she knew it was more than a dream because she had woken up, seen the children, closed her eyes, took a deep breath, opened her eyes only to find them still standing there. They paused for a moment, listening for any sounds of disturbances throughout the house. Slowly, her husband got out of bed, turning lights on from room to room as he made his way through the house. They could find nothing. They glanced at the clock around 3:15 in the morning. What children would be out at this time anyway? The 2 of them huddled back into bed together, unable to sleep, leaving every light in the house burning, just in case. Finally, the storm subsided, and the sun began to break. The room began to fill with an orange glow, and they start to feel comfort, just as they started to drift off to fall back asleep. They could hear what sounded like children giggling and running around outside. Had they just had a black-eyed children encounter and survived?
Up next, Bishop Christina Rake and demonologist Keith Johnson talk about the demonic aspects of black-eyed kids as we take you beyond the darkness.
Beyond the Darkness, and you can follow us now on Twitter at Beyond Dark Show. That's at Beyond Dark Show, or on Facebook, we are Beyond the Darkness Radio. Just check us out there, Beyond the Darkness Radio, and keep the conversation going. We'd love to hear from you. And if you've had any encounters with the black-eyed children or any other strange phenomena you'd like to share with us, you can always email those stories and encounters into us at beyond@darknessradio.com. The email beyond@darknessradio.com to share those stories. We're investigating the claims of black-eyed kids, black-eyed children, these mysterious creatures that seem to appear in groups of 1 to 5. And usually they're between the ages of 7 to 14 years old, very nondescript clothing, pale white skin. And the one thing that offsets them is these deep, dark, black eyes. The entire sclera completely blackened. You can't see color. You can't see white. What is this, and why are they always trying to get you to follow them or trying to get into your vehicle, get into your home, and asking permission to do so? As we look at this type of encounter, Tim, this starts to look and sound vaguely familiar to things like, as David Weatherly brought up, the vampire legend and lore, the realm of the demonic, that the only way to become truly possessed is to invite these sources into us.
Right.
So what we're going to do is spend the last part of the show with our guests. Joining us right now, we have Bishop Christina Rake, who is here, and world-renowned demonologist Keith Johnson. They're going to share some of their unique insights and perspective with us. Bishop Rake, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've worked in this realm and dealt with the theological aspects of demons and demonology. We see so much, and we're acutely, I guess, interested in it because of the things we see on TV and in movies, and that influences our perception of what the demonic realm is and looks like. As somebody who's actually been on the battlefront and have dealt with this, can you tell us what are the realities of demons? Can they physically move you with energy? Can they manipulate and master others? What can you tell us about the demonic realm?
Well, the primary focus of my experience, other than some horrible childhood experiences, has been academic. And in all of the readings that I've done going back 2,000 years in exorcisms and demonology, they can indeed affect our environment. They can indeed perhaps levitate someone who's in the process of an exorcism. However, an exorcism itself is not as spectacular as you'd often see on television or in movies. These images of priests being lifted and thrown and things like that, that is so rare. But in general, demonic can influence us in several different ways in an effort to break down our will. So you mentioned invitation. The most important gift, the most important aspect of the spiritual life is free will. And so they cannot do anything without God's permission. They also cannot do anything without ours. And so when we invite, there's always a subtle invitation at first, and then oftentimes there's an offer of invite me again in some way. Oh, a child spirit, stay with me. And then another opportunity for invitation. It's almost like they're trying to triple sign you to a contract so that they can argue, oh, yes, you asked for this. And so they break down your will to the point where you are willing or out of your mind, unbalanced because of what's happening around you, and are more easily susceptible to temptation to wound others, to hurt yourself, or even in extreme cases, to allow them to come into you in the situations of full-blown possession.
Well, Bishop, when we talk about the idea of invitation and that we are giving of our own free will, if we're going in with the volition that we want to help, these children seem lost and frightened, or they just need to use the phone, and you allow them through the threshold of your home, is that truly an invitation of free will? I mean, when your intention was something of kindness, love, and purity?
Well, first of all, that's why Satan was called by Jesus Christ the father of lies. We're not going to look at a full-blown demon and say, hey, come have a beer with me. That's not how it's going to work. When the devil comes, he doesn't come as some horrible, repugnant thing. He comes as everything you've ever wanted. And so the easiest way, demons are pure spirits. They're pure thought. They're so much more intelligent than us, and they've been studying us. What's the one thing that they could pretend to be that would cause us to want to assist them? A child, something vulnerable, something that pulls on our heartstrings, that makes us want to help. And what better torture for them, what better trap for them than to know that they have twisted a good deed and turned it into a temptation, a downfall. So while our intentions might be pure, we always have to be very cautious about these things, because we do invite when we say cross our threshold. But before I said there are several levels of invitation. You might get something where the child comes and wants to come inside. You invite them inside. But then they keep appearing to you and asking for more and more and more invitation. What if I move this? Is that okay? And you'll say, oh, that's so cool. Do it again. Invitation. What if I were to slam this door at night? What are you going to say? Oh, that's neat. Do it again. Can you turn off this light? Can you do that? Because we're interested. It knows how to play on our curiosity. It knows how to play on our desire to help the vulnerable and the lost. And again, that's why Satan is, quote unquote, the prince of this world. He knows how to pull our strings and how to get us to do exactly what he wants us to.
Also on the line with us, world-renowned demonologist. He's appeared on many different series. Keith Johnson is here. Now, Keith, you've assisted and been hands-on involved in deliverance work and exorcisms in the past, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I have.
And when you are dealing with somebody in a full-blown possession, you know, again, we see so much from Hollywood and, science fiction that our skewed perspective may be completely off base. But are there any physical traits when someone is infested with a demon? Will they really have raised welts that will spell words? Could it possibly change the color of eyes from normal to an entirely black sclera? Is that something you've ever encountered?
What I've encountered in possession, and I should say that demonic possession is relatively rare, even for somebody like me who actually goes out and is called into it. I have seen physical changes in the eyes, in the facial expression. Now, it's interesting to note that when somebody is overcome by demonic possession, and that would be transient possession, they're not possessed 100% of the time, their physiognomy does change. The expression changes. However, that expression will remain fixed for as long as that person is under possession usually. And the eyes, I've seen the eyes become very, very narrowed and dark, very dark, where the sclera does seem to darken, and they narrow their eyes very, very much like a serpent. They become very serpentine. And I have seen possessed where the eyes are darting around very, very rapidly. I believe, and others believe this as well, that the purpose of that is to avoid eye contact. If somebody is confronting that person, an exorcist or a demonologist, whatever, they will usually do anything to avoid eye contact, because somehow gazing into the eyes gives you some kind of limited momentary power over that spirit. Like the saying, the eyes are the windows of the soul. So I believe the point of that, or as in The Exorcist, the eyes rolling up backwards, although I have not encountered that in possession, that would be another way of avoiding eye contact. And
Could it be?
Usually,
could that be, Keith? Then,
yeah.
because what it's trying to do is take over this person and remove the humanity of what they were. And if you were to connect with their eyes, maybe there's a glimmer of recognition that would bring back the power, shift the power back to the human host as opposed to the demon that's trying to take over.
That's an excellent point, Dave. And yes, that is exactly right. The point is to dehumanize the victim as much as possible to a bestial state. So looking at that person's eyes, and especially the demonic hate it when you address them as the person, as the victim that the person really is, because that takes the attention away from them, that weakens their hold. So they absolutely hate that, and that's another good reason to avoid eye contact. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Bishop Rake, when we look at the history of the church and dealing with the demonic and malevolent spirits, it seems from what I've heard that there are some protective barriers in place, that if something evil is trying to trick us or take form, there's usually some form of deformity or something missing. Is there any true path of that? Is there any way we can follow that through literature, through history, through oral tradition, that is, in fact, what we know of the demonic realm?
Oh, absolutely. Of course, one of the greatest defenses is to have a well-formed conscience and a well-formed faith so that you can tell when you're being tricked. But if you were to go backwards into the lives of the saints, you would find stories about Satan appearing as an angel of light, or he can take the form of the Pope. And we even have stories from Joan of Arc, St. Joan of Arc. She was praying before an altar, and in prayer, the devil appeared as the Virgin Mother. And here's Virgin Mary talking to her, and she's telling her to do the opposite of what Joan thought God had told her to do. And Joan of Arc, very politely, because she had been told this by her spiritual director, asked to see the Virgin Mary's feet, because the gown was covering the feet. And the Virgin Mary became incensed. How dare you question me? And then she knew it wasn't the Virgin Mary. And when it did lift the gown, there was a hoof. See, God created everything in the world, and everything he created is good. Demons want to pretend to be God. That's what they want. They want godlike power, but they're not God. And they can never recreate the human form perfectly. And so you will find something off. And that's why if they appear with a hood or you have a saint appear to you with his hands in his pockets and thinking of random things, you ask to see what's hidden. And that really should be our guide for all the spiritual life. Ask to see what's hidden so that you can know the truth.
Keith, you brought up transient possession, where it's not a full-blown possession yet, but the spirit or the demonic seems to be able to enter at will. Are children more vulnerable to this? Is that why people encounter these black-eyed children? Could it be temporary or transient possession where the demonic force is looking for a more mature host, but it's using the children to get in the door?
It could be. The demonic often tries to trick the young children who are very impressionable into giving them some kind of permission to enter. However, I believe that the manifestations of the black-eyed children could be something even more sinister. I believe they could be entities unto themselves that are associated with the demonic realm, and kind of along the lines of the Men in Black. Not the government agents, but the Men in Black, who do seem to be of another realm, an inhuman realm. I believe that sometimes the children are not temporarily possessed, but they are actually entities that are posing as children.
You said that that true demonic possession is very rare. Have you seen children that are inflicted with the demonic?
I have seen children that are very, very oppressed, and they seem to be influenced by the demonic. I have not, at this point, seen a child that is totally under possession, although I have had clients people call me and say, my son is speaking in this unknown language. He seems to have knowledge that nobody would have for a 3-year-old. So I have not encountered it, but I have had people come to me for help and tell me about it.
Bishop Rake, shouldn't the children be the most protected? I mean, aren't they they're protected by their family, they're protected by God. Why would they be so vulnerable to these type of attacks?
It can often go back to actions within the family. You can become possessed through your own volition, but then there's also a form of possession where someone has used some kind of black art to lay a curse or some kind of foundation upon you, in which case, again, faith, prayer, all of that is foundational. But with children, and people I've spoken to, it's a much rarer occurrence. You would think the child would be fully protected. And to be honest with you, it's one of those realms that I've never fully understood. It's the type of thing like the mystery of suffering. You can come up with an answer for it. The answer isn't satisfactory. It's the type of thing where our limited human will just becomes reviled. However, we know why the demonic would go after children, because in going after the child, they take down the whole family who loves the child. Why God would permit such a thing to happen, that's where I shrug my shoulders and shake my head and say, I'm not sure. You would think that they would be fully protected. And there is the concept of cursing and even parent involvement and things that then gets the child involved. But honestly, like I said, it's sort of that Job phenomenon. I'm not sure what God would allow that for. But like Keith said, I've heard of it happening too.
Keith, cursing and family trends, whether it's the family has had a curse placed on them, or as I've heard, parents have the ability to, and we've heard about this again in movies and in books and in different forms of literature, almost sell their children's soul in order to gain favor with dark forces. If we truly have free will, why is it that the will of our parents supersedes the will of us individually as a child, that they have that ability to gift our soul or gift us as a vessel to the dark side?
Well, of course, free will does reign, but parents also do have a spiritual authority over their children as well as a legal authority. They have a spiritual authority. They can accept a curse for their child, unfortunately, and they can cause a great deal of problems for that child, and when that child grows to be an adult, obviously, as well. But although this is terrible, it does happen. Satanic ritual abuse, for example, I do believe that God will show us a way out of that. He will provide a means of escape, which we may not see right away, but eventually that will come to light. And where this is allowed, it's only allowed for a certain extent, and God will provide a way out.
It seems, Bishop Rake, that in most of the cases we hear of possession, oppression, and dealing with this, that they are normally religious-backed people. Again, this seems to fall into kind of a weird dichotomy of if they're religious in nature and they have a belief system, why are they being attacked, and why is this not happening to atheists? Why is this not happening to that people that stand outside, the Christian belief system?
Well, actually, and I'm sure Keith can speak to this more fully, I hear from people who ask for my advice, I hear more often that it occurs to people who don't have a firm foundation. And it's usually a situation where there's a member of the family who's very religious and very devout, but the family themselves, they don't have a firm foundation. So if you have a case of possession, you'll often have this person surrounded by faith, but the person themselves is not of faith. And the other thing that we have to bear in mind is there's a form of possession where the person actually, is very rare, asks for it as a way to expiate the sins of the world. They look for it as a way of suffering, as a way of giving up to God. And there are rumors that Mother Teresa did just this, and that John Paul II performed an exorcism on her. And there are other isolated incidents in the history of the saints where a saint has done that and asked for that. But again, those are extremely rare. It's been my experience that you often have people who are not hyper-religious. If the demonic did go after a religious person, everything they do is to pull us from God, to lead us away, to tempt us into sin. So there is some end game for them in approaching, but they would rather have the lukewarm. They would rather have the easy target oftentimes, and that's someone who is not hyper-religious, who doesn't have that faith. But as I said, I'm sure Keith can speak more fully to that. That's been my experience.
Keith, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yes, and I would like to say it's an honor to be on this show with Bishop Rake. And yes, sometimes the person will not have a firm faith. They will be doubt. Sometimes they have a psychological instability where the demon will try to work its way and use any kind of weakness, whether it be a weakness of faith, a lack of faith, or as Bishop Rake said, lukewarm. They will try to work on that weakness as much as possible. And of course, sometimes it is a person of faith that the person is so faithful that the demon will attack to try to bring down one of God's chosen. But of course, a faithful person does have a lot of protection in Jesus Christ. Yes, the demonic will often try to get somebody who is weak in their faith and try to push them back, try to arrange opportunities where this person will not hear the word of God or will not receive help, will cause stumbling blocks, very, very masterfully too. They are very, very clever spirits.
All right, we're coming into the end here, and you've heard about this phenomena, Keith. I know the Reverend the Bishop kind of weighed in on her aspects of it. When you hear about these encounters of these black-eyed children, these children that often will cause unprecedented fear, then the jet black eyes, sometimes a pungent smell that comes with them, what is your theory on what it is we're truly dealing with in this case?
My theory is that these are actual demonic entities. There are instances where children, when they are taken over, like anyone, the eyes will often become darkened. But I think many of these encounters, rare as they are, I do believe that they are actual demonic entities, are minions of Satan, and they are sent in the guise of children to deceive people, because children are often seen as very trusting and innocent. But you've seen one with black eyes, I would certainly pray for protection when encountering anything like this, a black-eyed child or anything that could be associated with demonic forces.
Bishop Rake, when we see something like this, Joan of Arc questioned the visage of the Virgin Mary and was proven right. This was something taking on that image. Is there a way that we can determine whether this is just a child or something of the demonic? Is there a way to challenge them and do it in a way that we're still protected?
Yes, the best way to do so, first of all, that fully formed conscience is key. But anyone will tell you a prayer is our armor. St. Paul said, prayer, put on the armor of prayer, the breastplate of Jesus Christ. You carry the sword of faith. When you're confronted with something like that, begin praying. Begin praying. Saying prayers you know. Pray freely. See what happens. Start saying the name of God. Start repeating the name of the Holy Trinity. See what happens, because if they have a reaction and they despise God, if there is a reaction, then you immediately know that you're in the presence of something that hates your God. And anything that hates your God is not your friend. So that's the first thing, and I think the most important thing, to start invoking God's name, to start saying God's name, not as a challenge at this creature, but just through prayer. And you'll see a reaction, and then you'll know.
Should we even engage them, Keith, if we see them? Should we question them? Should we try to get to the bottom of what's going on? Or should, just pull away or shut the door and end that moment right then and there?
Well, I'd be hesitant to just shut the door, but I would pray. I would put on the armor of God, and I would greet the child in the name of Jesus. And if this child is a satanic entity in reality, there will be a reaction. They will either become combative or they will back off. I'd be very hesitant about inviting them into the house, and because it's very hard, from what I hear, to get them to leave.
All right. Well, I can't thank you both enough for joining us this evening and weighing in on this strange and bizarre encounter. We have Bishop Christina Rake and Keith Johnson, the demonologist, with us. So, folks, you heard it here for yourself. This seems to be real. It's spreading. More and more people are experiencing this. Are we giving it power through thought forms and tulpa form? Are we giving it that energy that's creating a groundswell behind it? Or has it always existed, but now through the advent of social media and the internet, when these stories can be shared so much more easily, is that what's really going on out here? And now what do you do when you encounter these beings? What happens to those that are unfortunate enough to let them in before they realize that they have a black-eyed child in their home? We've heard a few instances of that type of phenomena. We'll discuss that and more on future episodes. So we encourage you to keep up with us, subscribe, and get us locked in so that you can pick up our podcast where you can hear us every Monday going forward here on Podcast One, part of the Jericho Network. I'm Dave Schrader. That's Tim Dennis. And again, we encourage you to follow us on social media. Spread the word. We're going beyond the darkness. You can find us on Twitter at Beyond Dark Show. That's at Beyond Dark Show. And on Facebook, Beyond the Darkness Radio. Beyond the Darkness Radio. And we're always here to get your emails, your input, thoughts on this brand new show. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us both at beyond@darknessradio.com. We'll be back. We've got more stories to share and more things to explore as we go deeper beyond the darkness.